Blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to the Our Forever Smiles podcast, a podcast created to support mothers of children who were born with clefts and those who love them. I'm your host, Laura Arroyo, and I'm also a mother of a daughter who was born with a surprise cleft palate. I know the challenges you face every day, whether you have just learned the difficult news of your baby's cleft lip or palate, you're in the midst of pre-op or post-op, or you're an OG cleft mom. This podcast is for you. In a weekly conversation, we will talk about everything from feeding and speech therapy to surgery and school. We'll share tips from guest experts and advocates and even share a little joy in the process. You can listen to Our Forever Smiles wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the Our Forever Smiles, Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. I am Laura Arroyo. Before we jump into this episode, I would like to invite you to join this community to hear conversations with other cleft moms and also advocates that will help you feel supported along your journey. All I want you to do is click on the follow or subscribe button. I love your support, and it's incredible to see all of us come together. We're just getting started here, and I can't wait to go on this journey with you. So thank you so much for subscribing. We have so much in store this year. As a note, we are not medical doctors, and we do not intend for you to use the information that we share here as medical advice. We are parents and advocates who love our children, and we are sharing our own personal experiences. If you would like to share your story on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to us at ourforeversmiles@gmail.com. So this week, as I've been recording episodes with various cleft moms, I also really wanted to reach out to the community of cleft affected individuals as well. And so I thought to myself, who are the advocates in this space? I know when my daughter got her diagnosis, first, of course, I was completely shocked. But I also just, as we all do, Googled a lot, and I went in to search for information. And some of it is really, really scary and some of it is reassuring. I feel like you get to the reassuring parts after you get through the scary stuff, which is, I'm just so grateful that I was able to reach the voices that I needed to reach. But this week, in search of trying to find cleft advocates that are personally affected or cleft affected, I stumbled upon our guest today, Christine. Christine was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. She has had more than 20 surgeries and was bullied and told that she would never amount to anything because of her facial differences. Today, Christine is a TEDx speaker, which is where I found her, and a certified confidence coach who helps clients improve their self-acceptance and self-esteem. She has a PhD in business and volunteers with Smile Train to advocate for the cleft lip and palate community. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you so much, Laura, for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate, your time and just your willingness to speak with me today. It is true. First of all, before any of this, before I started this podcast, before I even had a daughter, I used to binge TED Talks. Like I would watch all of them. And so as I was looking for cleft advocates and just cleft voices and people in this space, I was like, surely there has to be a TED Talk on this. And so I went searching and I found her video, and I was so inspired and so moved and so proud. I mean, that we had a voice, on that, large platform that, you were able to share your experience there. Very, very powerful messaging. And so I guess my first question is how were you able to do TED and how did you get there?
Well, thank you. It was a long road to get to the TED stage and to give the talk. It was a lot of perseverance and applying and getting my name out there. And fortunately, I applied to the local university where I live, University of Florida. They were hosting the smaller TEDx, which is, part of the TED brand. So I actually had to apply to them twice before they accepted me on the third time. Each time I applied, they gave me feedback why my topic wasn't strong enough. And I think what it was is that they were really looking for something, as all TED Talks are very personal, very vulnerable. And when I did my third application, I said, you know what, I'm not going to worry about the perfect talk. I'm just going to speak from the heart, as I've learned to do, overcome the shame that I've struggled with for so long, and just say, what do I really want the world to know? What do I want them to hear? And I let my passion come through. And ironically, the application I submitted is not what the talk ended up being, because it changed a little bit, because I went to Kenya with Smile Train when I was writing the talk, but a lot of it still got in there. A lot of, wanting the world to know what it's like to go out with cleft lip and palate, and the statistics and the basic information about it. But it was a long journey. There was a lot of hours of practicing, of writing the talk, of rehearsing, of applying. So it's not as easy as just getting on the stage and speaking whatever comes to mind. It's a lot of preparation, but I loved it, and I'm so glad to have the opportunity to have done it.
Oh, that is absolutely fascinating. I have always wondered this one question. Do you memorize the talk?
The answer is yes. All 15 minutes of my talk I had memorized, and I have video of myself practicing and memorizing, and I use an app to help me memorize it, but that was actually a requirement to memorize the talk. I had no slides. The slides you see were behind me, so I didn't see them during the talk. There was someone else that was managing them. I had no notes. There was no prompter, so I had to memorize the entire talk, which was about 8 pages, double spaced typed. And let me tell you, I didn't know how I was going to be able to do it, but, just like everything else, you do it one little step at a time, and a lot of hours of practicing and rehearsing to make it look natural and not like you rehearse. And by the time I was all done, I have newfound respect and appreciation for the Broadway actors and the movie actors, because I know what they must go through to make it their work look so natural and memorizing their lines.
Yeah. So I figured that, right? I was like, they have to memorize it because, it's you have to, if you don't memorize all of it, you at least have to memorize some of it. But now that you shared that, it's pretty much a requirement to memorize the entire thing. But then I thought to myself, like, because in the middle of it, people in the audience react. And so I was thinking, I'm like, I might get thrown off by that, like by their claps or their reactions or having to pause, yeah. So I guess, was that, worrisome or
Well, there were two things that were very worrisome for me. The first is that my father was right in the front row of the audience, and I knew he was going to be in the audience. He was very proud of me, and I knew he was going to be in the audience. I didn't know he was going to be right there in the front row, because I was backstage when he arrived, because he arrived separately. And so I walked on stage, and I'm already a little, nervous. And backstage, I was having a complete meltdown. I was fine until the 5 minutes before I get on stage, and I was the first speaker of the day. So I'm backstage, and I'm really having a meltdown, saying, you know what, I can't do this. I couldn't do this. And I was, I just have somebody else go, I'm not going to do this. And the stage manager was amazing. She, calmed me down. She gave me my boost of confidence. And she said, "Look, you got this." And of course, I forgot all of my lines in the 5 minutes before I got on stage. And she says, "No, you know your lines. You got this." My coach, I had a speaker coach who helped me. She reminded me, she's like, "You got this. You know your lines." So I walked on stage, and then I saw my father in the audience. I was like, oh my gosh, that kind of took me back. And I said, you know what? Well, all the hours of practicing, I looked, at the audience, and I pretended I was actually back home in my living room where I did all the practicing, and I just opened my mouth, and the lines came out just as I'd been practicing them. And there was one part where the audience did clap halfway through. And I paused to, let them clap. And that's where I was really grateful that I had my lines memorized because I knew where I left off and where I was able to pick up again. And it was actually, made it a lot easier. And it kind of having my lines memorized calmed my nerves a lot in the long run. So it definitely helped.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, you mentioned your father. What an incredible day for you. But I guess, he has also been on this journey with you. So what was, I guess, that experience like for him seeing you there? And, that I would imagine that this is kind of like one of those peaks in your careers, right? Like that, you kind of hit a high and I'm sure he's very, very proud of that moment. What was that like for him?
He was very proud because the way that they structured the Tedx event is that it's a whole conference and, you can go around to they have like little rooms set up and you can talk to the different people about the speakers. I wasn't able to talk because I was getting ready for my talk, but my father got to talk to some of the other workers, the behind the scenes people who help with the talk, and he was able to talk to them and say what speaker he was most looking forward to. So he was able to talk to them about me and introduce himself as my father. And he was definitely, I heard afterwards, the proud papa. He loved to tell the story of the day I was born, how he was so scared and so anxious about me being born with a cleft and where I am now and how proud he was of my accomplishments. And it was really heartwarming to hear the staff come up to me afterwards saying, yeah, I met your father and he was so proud and he told the story of the day you were born and where you were in this town. And it was really amazing. It was really heartwarming for me. And I really enjoyed hearing that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can imagine that. And so, just in mentioning that and just retelling that story of the day that you were born. So talk to me a little bit about, where you're from and your family and I guess what you remember about your childhood.
Absolutely. So I was originally born and raised in New York, and you probably hear my New York accent, but I live in Florida now. I've lived in Florida for as long as I've lived in New York. I've lived in New York for about 25 years, and now I'm in Florida about the same time. But interestingly, I never lost my New York accent. And I have a younger sister. She's a couple of years younger than me. She does not have a cleft. So I'm the only one in my family that has a cleft lip. My parents, my grandparents on both sides of my family do not have a cleft. So when I was born back in the 70s, doctors were not as informed about cleft lip as they are now. And as I mentioned, my father was in a complete panic. His first words were like, oh my God, what do we do? And he came from the generation where, his family, especially his father, the generation that he was from believed that babies are born perfectly. They're born with no problems, and any baby that was not born perfect, it's not right. So he had a hard time accepting me at first. My mother, however, was my staunch advocate. She was very strong. She was very smart. And that way, she just asked the doctors. She says, well, can we fix it? And the doctor says, well, yeah, no surgery that can be done. And we'll put you in touch with the doctors. And my mother says, okay, that's, we'll get to work. And so she called my father and she said, like, my father even repeats the story where my mother would tell him, you have a daughter who is breathing, who has two arms, two legs, or four limbs, who is relatively healthy other than the cleft. Be grateful that you have that and, everything else can be taken care of and let's move forward. So that kind of helped him calm his anxiety and helped him with the acceptance piece, but it was still difficult for him. I think a lot of it was just his own upbringing. But my mother was my strongest advocate, helping me, finding the doctors that I needed, finding the surgeons, especially during a time where there wasn't as much information. Smile chain wasn't established in the 70s. They didn't get formed until the 80s. So there wasn't as many resources as there are now. So she did a great job with what she had to work with.
Yeah. Wow. It's so interesting because I think that even now, I feel like even now there is still, I mean, it's getting better, but there is still some stigma, right? That there's something that the mother could have done differently, or just this idea or this questioning around. And a lot of it is also just general like misinformation and stuff as well. So I can't fault people for not knowing things that they haven't experienced themselves, right? But there is this like idea that, well, what would you do, or how
Hmm.
could this happen? And so, our goal here, I mean, my goal here is to really share with people that I think one of the main messages that has kind of resonated with me this week is like that this could happen to anyone,
Hmm.
including you. And so, you know,
Hmm.
it's like just like sharing that to other people that there's nothing different or even special about anything that I did or my pregnancy or my daughter or my family. Really, it is. I'm just as I was just as shocked as everyone else. So,
Hmm.
but I guess growing up, once your parents were able to get past that point, what would you say were the ways that they were able to support you and be your biggest advocate?
Well, my mother was always my advocate in finding the doctors, the surgeons, the plastic surgeons, and I want to say the best surgeons that she could. The hospital where I was born didn't have a plastic surgeon department that could help, so she took it upon herself to find a hospital in New York City that was a teaching hospital. They had a little bit more experience with working with craniofacial differences, particularly with children. Because they were a teaching hospital, they were more on the cutting edge. So we went to New York City, which is about a half hour from where I lived at the time. As I got older, she would push with the doctor and say, well, what about this? What about that? What about, braces? And then as an adult, when I was in my 20s and I moved from New York to Florida, she was the one who said, look, you're getting older. The bridge work that I had when I was 13, she said, it's not going to last forever. You might want to start thinking about finding doctors down here in Florida. And, me being an adult, I just at that point wanted to put all of my cleft issues behind me and said, I was in my childhood, I'm done. And that was also part of myself is that I denied having a cleft. I refused to talk about it. That was my way of coping growing up because I couldn't deal with my own shame of having it. So when I moved to Florida, she says, well, you got to think about doctors and dentists, and you're going to need new bridge work or something because your bridge work is failing. You're almost 30. It's not going to last forever. She actually was the one who found a dental school in Florida where I live and got me an appointment there. And I was fortunate enough to go to a dental school with student dentists and their, their teachers, their faculty to get dental implants. So I know this is audio only, not video, but for you, you can see what I have now is implants. That's another round of dental work I had when I was in my 30s. And so she got that done for me as well. And so she was with me through all of the surgeries, all of the speech therapy, all of the dental visits. She took me to all the operations, all the hospital visits, all the doctor visits, all of the follow-up visits, everything. And so that was also how she advocated for me. And, I mean, we had that, I don't want to say we had that special bond because my relationship with her was very contentious and strained because it wasn't a normal mother-daughter relationship, but she was definitely an advocate in my care.
Yeah. Yeah, I often hear that just in groups and just forums that I've read that a lot of cleft affected individuals are kind of push their feelings or their experience with their cleft once they have, surgery or once they're repaired to their liking or once they've reached a point
Hmm.
where they feel like this is it, right? Like
Hmm.
this is the last surgery and you're almost like kind of fed up with the whole thing, right? You just want to move past it. You want to just be over it. So is that something that you would say that you've experienced as well?
That definitely was something that I experienced, but for me, it ran deeper than that because I was kind of caught in the middle with my father. having difficulty accepting me because I wasn't, as he put it, perfect, and I was born with the birth difference. I felt his shame. I felt his trouble accepting me. His father was incredibly mean to me. His father, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, did not like me at all. He was verbally abusive. I have memories at holidays of going to his place for the holidays, and he would make fun of me. He was just, he was just not a nice person. And again, that was a generation, and a lot of it was a generation that he was brought up in, but it was also his belief that children should be born perfectly, children should be, seen and not heard. And for older people, could be a very triggering statement. And so my father had difficulty accepting me. My mother was very strong-willed. She was also narcissistic. So I had that dynamic dealing with. She also wanted me to be almost like in her, like her little mini me, and I couldn't be my own person. And I felt all the shame, just, and as anybody would who has a facial difference, the shame and the disgust and the feeling like, okay, what is wrong with me? Especially when I heard the language, my mother says, well, we'll fix it. And the doctors kept telling me, we're going to make you look beautiful. We're going to make you look like a model. To me, that made me feel like I was flawed and I was disgusted. So my method of coping was denial, pretending there was nothing wrong with me, especially with the bullying, taking it all in and pretending it didn't bother me. Not a method I recommend. I don't recommend denial because, as I tell people, it's not a river in Egypt. So so, yeah. So, but yeah, when I got to be an adult and I eventually did get married, I reached that point where I was done with my surgeries and I didn't want anything more to do with it. But I was also still in that denial stage. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. And I refused to talk about my cleft with anybody because to talk about it meant that I had to address it. I had to face reality and I couldn't handle that. And so I think that adults who do that, I understand that they do it because it's their way of coping. And it also is a fine line. For some people, they feel that talking about their cleft becomes their identity. It becomes who they are and it becomes all they think about. And for others, like me, I see it as a part of who I am and then I can give back to help, but it's not the only part of me. It's just a section of me.
Yeah, that's so true. And I really, I've been trying to be intentional about using like person first language. And sometimes I get things like backwards. So forgive me for that if I do that during our conversation. But just in thinking about the bullying and from what it seems like, I mean, a lot of the bullying came from your own family, which is, that's heartbreaking. I'm so sorry to hear that you had to experience that. And that must have been really troubling for you. When was the first time that you realized that you were different?
Oh, that would have to be probably very young. I mean, I don't really know exactly how old I was. I just know probably I would have to say 4 or 5 years old, maybe even younger, because I had all the surgeries. I had all the doctor visits. My first surgery is when I was about 6 months old, and then maybe even younger than that. And then I had surgeries since then. And so it was always hospital visits. I had my first bone graft when I was 5 or 6 years old. And at that point, I think that's when I was old enough to understand why I needed bone graft so that my teeth would come in normally, so that I could talk and breathe. Having trouble eating, having trouble breathing, having trouble having speech therapy from a very young age, all of those things. So I think that's when I really knew that I was different and that there was, I was bullied from when I first started going to school. And not too much in kindergarten and first grade because I went to a Catholic school. But when halfway through first grade, I had to go to a public school because speech therapy wasn't offered in the Catholic school. And that's when the bullying really started, was when I went to public school and it got worse as I got, higher up in the grades. So I would have to say, to answer your question, probably when I was 4 or 5 years old and I really realized all the doctor visits, all the surgeries. It's hard not to realize that there was something different about you.
Yeah. That you're having a unique experience outside of your peers. Yeah. I could see that. you mentioned in your bio and stuff that you've had over 20 surgeries and oof, it just I can't imagine something like that. I also spoke with advocate. Her name is Corinne, and she spoke to me about how many surgeries she's had as well. And I don't know, I just feel like it's such a challenging thing to have to go through repeatedly. And then once you come to realize like what's actually happening, right? And there has to be some kind of fear, I guess, that comes into play. What would you say was like your worst surgery or the surgery that was the most painful or just didn't have a great experience with?
All of the surgeries were painful and fearful, but the one that I remember, there's actually two of them that I remember very vividly as if they happened yesterday, even though one of them happened when I was 6 years old, and that was the bone graft when I was about 6 years old. They took a piece of bone from my hip, they put it into my mouth, and maybe, I don't know if it was the day of the surgery when I came out of recovery room and I came out of the anesthesia, or the day after, I don't really remember, but the nurses made me get up and walk. Now, as an adult, I understand that. They want me to get up and walk so I didn't get stiff and to get the, leg moving, and it didn't really take the whole bone from my hip like I thought when I was 2 years old. Just a little piece of the bone. And you know, but I mean, when I'm 6 years old and I'm thinking they just took the whole bone out of my hip, how am I going to be able to walk? And it hurt because, there's a big gash in my hip and I'll never wear a bikini without showing that scar. And so they made me get up and walk. And I remember thinking the nurses were so mean, making me walk. And I was crying and I didn't want to walk. And I didn't want to get out of bed. They were, back in the 70s. I don't think they had the bedside manner that they have now. And they were saying, no, you have to do it. And my mother was kind of deciding and saying, no, you be a good girl and listen to the nurses. And that was very hard for me to do. But I also wanted to
Yeah.
please my mother. And so I pushed through it. But I remember thinking how mean these people are, how mean the nurses are making me walk, how mean my mother is making me do what the nurses tell me. And, so that was, it was still it was very painful. The other surgery that I remember was when I was in my 20s. It was one of my last surgeries I had to remove some extra scar tissue from my nose and my lip. And it was just all cosmetic at that time. I only had the surgery. The nurse came in. She wanted to change my hospital gown and give me a sponge bath. And I don't remember why I wasn't able to get up out of the bed. Maybe the same day I had the surgery for whatever reason. And it was in the hospital again. They had the snaps on the shoulder. And she went to go undo the snaps. And when she pulled the snaps, she ripped them apart, but she accidentally gave me a backhand right in the nose, like basically just backhand right to the nose. I screamed and I saw stars, and I never felt pain like I felt when she did that. And I was so mad at her, and I didn't know. It was like my voice was taken away because the pain was so bad. And all she said was, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" And I remember thinking a whole lot of curse words that I will not repeat here. As I was an adult, I was about
Oh
22, 23 at the time.
my God.
And I remember thinking I couldn't even talk because it was just the pain and the anger and worrying, like, did you just mess up all the work that they just did and all the work they did for the past 22 years? And and fortunately, everything was okay. No damage was done. She didn't even get the doctor immediately. It wasn't until the doctors came in the next day and I told them what happened, and they looked at it and they x-rayed it and they says, no, everything was fine. Just took a little bit longer to heal and a little bit more tender. But so, yeah, those were some painful surgeries.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Like if you're right, this is just audio, but if you could see my face right now, my mouth is like wide open. And the reason why is because this is like on a small scale. This is on the smallest scale. I got my nose pierced, right? Like years ago. And in the middle of the night, I just lightly, I was asleep
Yeah.
and I completely forgot about this nose piercing that I had. And I did like this, right?
Yeah.
Because, my nose
Yeah.
was
You might,
running.
you
And
know.
when I tell you, I just rubbed my nose
Uh-huh.
lightly. When I tell you the pain that radiated through my body. I literally jumped. I woke up. Like,
Yeah.
it was like, and I like screamed. So I can't even imagine
Yes. Yes.
someone accidentally like backhanding me in the nose. Like, oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did you
Yeah.
cry?
I cried and I screamed and I yelled at her. And it was like the day after or the day of the surgery. It was like I was still in the hospital because I just had the surgery done. So, I mean, everything was still so. And I all I remember was the pain. Like I think that was just. I have a very high pain tolerance. And I often joke that the reason why I have such a high pain tolerance is because I dealt with it for, 50 something years of my life and all these surgeries and all of these instances of having to walk, after they removed a piece of bone from my hip and getting backhanded in the nose after having surgery on my nose. All those things, I kind of get you used to having some pain. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure I cried and let out a few, a lot of words and was just angry. And I remember not even being able to say anything because I was just so, like, the pain just took my breath away, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's like I mean, I'm telling you, when I did that and it's a unique type of pain. Like I never felt that before. It was kind of yeah, it shocked me. And that was just from a nose piercing. So I can
Mhm.
just imagine. I can't imagine. Yeah, we laugh, right? But another thing that Corinne told me, she says I've had to build up a good sense of humor with
Yes.
all of my experiences, that I've gone through. Yeah.
Mhm.
And and speaking of all of that, how did you become so confident? I know that you touched on this in your talk, and what was that turning point for you in your journey?
Mhm. That's a great question. So the big turning point was after my mother passed. Because she was my biggest advocate, when she died, I was alone. Even though my sister, I had a younger sister, she knew what I went through. We never talked about my surgeries and my experiences growing up with a cleft. We weren't close in that regard, and I felt too much shame to talk to her about it. So when my mother died, I felt so alone and I felt there was nobody else I could talk to. So I hit social media looking for anything I could find about cleft lip and palate. I found a Facebook group of adults with a cleft. I joined the group. I started talking to them and I realized, hey, there's really nothing wrong with me. I'm not the monster I thought I was. And through them, I started sharing my experiences. We shared laughs. I realized I had the same issues they did. And then from there, I joined Smile Train. They were looking for members for their Cleft Community Advisory Council. I joined the council and I realized that every time I shared a piece of myself, it built up my confidence and it helped me heal. And what I've learned over the years is that every time we tell our story, we share ourselves, that's why I love public speaking. I love doing podcasts because it helps heal all of those wounds. And it also helps educate society about cleft lip and palate. And it helps let others know that they are not alone, that they have a connection with somebody out there who's been through it before, that they're not the only ones. And so that was how I built my that was a large way of building my confidence. But I also realized that I had so much to offer and I wanted to give back. I wanted to help others who were struggling. I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. My passion is helping others and supporting, and so I did a lot of self-development work. Went through a lot of therapy. I've worked with therapists, I'm still in therapy over 10 years. And I've learned that by building my skills, that also enhances my confidence, overcoming, the issues of conflict. And I like to say I'm a recovering people pleaser. So I worked through that. I've worked through, it's okay to say no. It's okay not to be liked by everybody. World isn't going to end. And realizing that, people who bully me, because they're afraid. And that's, so realizing that if I am called names, yes, it hurts and it's rude, but it doesn't define me and it doesn't mean I'm any less of a person. So it's really a long journey of sharing my story, working on myself that went into building my confidence.
Wow. Yeah. And so now you work as a certified confidence coach. So what do you think, I don't know, I guess like three ways that someone could, build their confidence.
Mhm,
And this doesn't even have to be, I guess, if you're a person that's cleft affected, right? It can kind of be applicable to anyone, but
mhm,
how do you build confidence?
mhm. That's a great question. So for anybody who wants to improve their confidence, the first thing I would say is to know how to be okay with your emotions. Know how to manage your emotions and not be afraid of them. For me, I was always so afraid of my emotions. I denied them. I pushed them away, even whether it was anger or the shame or the sadness. I just denied them. I stuffed them away in the back of my head. I refused to feel them. And again, that doesn't work. They come back with a vengeance. And then when they do surface, the biggest thing for me is that I was always so sensitive and I was always such an emotional person. I always felt deeply that when I got to be an adult, I would have random outbursts of crying. I worked in business, and if my boss yelled at me, if I did something wrong, he would yell at me. It brought up all of the shame from when I was a child. And I would just start bursting into tears in the middle of his office. And then he would yell at me more, because again, it was growing up in the 80s and I worked in offices. It was still a male dominated society. And he would be like, well, what are you crying for? You can't handle this. And it would just make me cry more. And so I felt like I was so inadequate. But what I learned now is that if I can manage my emotions to the point of saying, okay, you know what? If he yells at me, if he says I did something wrong, I can take a moment, ground myself using some mindfulness techniques, go to the bathroom, calm myself down, and realize that it's okay to feel those feelings. Maybe put it in a little, I put it in the box. And then when I go home that night, then I get the emotion out and I feel it. I have that good cry. I'm not afraid of them. So the first one, learn how to cope with and manage your emotions. The second one is learn how to interact with people, build those interpersonal skills. I had terrible social anxiety growing up. If you would have told me, 7 years ago, I would have given a TED talk about cosmic empowerment. I would be on podcasts that I'm on. I would be public speaking. I would have said, no way, you're crazy. But building my confidence, learning to speak with people, learning to face conflict, learning to say no, become that recovering people pleaser, realize that, not everybody has to like me. It's okay, and learning how to interact with others, overcome that social anxiety. Really, the biggest thing for me was asking for what I want and not being overly concerned with what people think of me. Knowing that, hey, people can understand me when I talk, even if they make fun of me and say they can't. They can, or if they can't, that's their problem and not mine. So I've learned to develop those interpersonal skills, how to ask for what I want, how to listen, how to communicate. And in doing that and saying no and setting boundaries, that also gave me the confidence. And then the third way is knowing what I call how to manage those difficult situations. We all have those moments where we're going to get triggered from something, whether it's a childhood memory, whether it's being told that, you need another surgery, or whether it's that painful moment where you get hit in the face by a nurse and, the pain is so great. So learning how to manage those situations, what I call distress tolerance, and that's also something that I learned in therapy, but I even teach it to my clients. It's using whatever technique and tip works, whether it's in that moment, using your favorite scent. My favorite scent is vanilla, or thinking of a favorite image, or whatever you have to do in that moment to deal with that pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, or just the news that you got. For me, it was like being told, hey, we need another surgery, or having braces put on. And if you've ever had braces put on, they're painful also when they go on, and even sometimes when they come off. So learning to cope with that pain by using the skill of managing that distressing moment, or again, being triggered. Even as an adult, all the work that I've done, I still get triggered from time to time. It happened to me about a week ago when I was having a conversation with someone and they were not hearing me, and I all of a sudden just burst into angry tears because I realized they were talking to me and we were conversing, but they were not hearing me. And when I went to go process later on, I realized that I was triggered back to my childhood of not being heard and not being seen. And so in that moment, when I was crying and upset in the conversation and feeling a little embarrassed and ashamed, I realized that if I used my distress tolerance skill of how to manage that distressing moment when I was feeling unheard and feeling angry, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have cried, and I would have been a little bit more calm and say, hey, you're not hearing me. Let's not continue this conversation. So to recap, managing those emotions, working on your skills, your people skills, interpersonal skills, and managing those distressing moments. When you have a handle, when you're able to do and build all of those skills, it makes you feel empowered, that you can tackle the world.
I love that too. And I also love that, just the emphasis on that you have to keep working at it too, right? Like, I mean, you recognize in that moment that, you recognize a trigger that you had, and knowing that you too, even though that you are the coach, the confidence coach, right? And you still also have to put these principles and these skills into practice, and to make sure that they're reinforced into your everyday life and your way of being. Um, one thing that someone shared with me as well in doing the podcast is that it's been therapeutic to share their experience, and they never thought that they would be the one out there speaking and sharing information to the world and just being an advocate. So I commend, all of you for stepping up to this. Me myself, you wouldn't know this, but I am also a person that is kind of shy. Anytime I tell someone that they're like, "You shy way," but and what happens is, you know what? I'm actually more anxious than I am, I think, shy. And what happens is that my anxiety, it actually converts into like this nervous energy rather than I go out versus in, if that makes sense. So like,
Right.
I'll show up somewhere and I'll have all of this nervous energy. And instead of, because I know that I want to go in, I guess my knee jerk reaction is to go out, which means like now I'm really chatty, cause I'm just trying to fill the space with, with words and just, word vomit and all these things. Yeah. So that's one of those things that I really want to work on with myself, and just, reflecting on how I can present myself more confidently without feeling, I mean, ultimately burnt out at the end of it. Cause I feel like, oh my goodness, at the end of it, I'm so burnt out. And then I always end up feeling like I've said too much.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
I always say in that
So
case, just speak from the heart. and and healing the anxiety. Journaling for me has been a great tool. I started writing when I was young, and I had friends that I met during summer camp, and we went away. We didn't live near each other, and this is back before instant message, before the internet. So letters were the only way, and I realized I couldn't always write them letters, postage and everything. So I would journal, and I would write a letter to them in my journal, or sometimes I would even write a letter to myself, or I pretended at the time my journal was my best friend, and I would write to the journal like I was talking to my best friend. And so that helped me also with coping, but also now as an adult, journaling helps me process, because when I write things down, you can kind of get that distance. And so I always, encourage people, and I would even encourage you to just say, okay, what's the feeling that comes up when you feel like you want to do the cattiness and the word vomit and the anxiety? And when you put that in a journal, it's for your eyes only. And so you feel safe about it. And you'd be surprised what your mind tries to find the answers, and what insights and what kind of revelations come out of that. And from there, you can take a look and say, okay, is that something I want to work on? I want to examine further. Or is that something I just want to leave there and maybe deal with when I have more strength?
yeah. Yeah. I love that. We also had a cleft mom that was on the podcast as well, Gina Kosher. She's at the Celebrating Mama on Instagram, and she has a wonderful gratitude journal that a lot of people have used and seen benefits from. So I'm also pro journaling. So yeah, I guess thinking back to your experience growing up and just looking at what has been done in the cleft community now, what would you say has been like the major changes, whether that's in like medical care? Because it, from what it sounds like, you kind of went through the process that I understand now as to be the process for children that are born with clefts. So what has changed medically and in society? What do you think has been the biggest changes?
Mhm. Medically, the biggest change that I've seen is the technology, the medical technology, the surgeries now. I think children born with a cleft now need far less surgeries than I needed. They have the NAM taping, which means that they don't need the surgery at the younger age because the taping helps close the lip a little bit so that gives them the ability to drink or nurse rather and eat so that when they do have their first surgery, it's not as intense. I know that they were showing me the surgery for the palate because I don't think there's surgery yet. Anyway, close the palate without surgery. But I know the NAM taping is a very big advancement to not need surgery so young. It also means that they can wait to have the surgery when the upper lip is a little bit more formed and it reduces the scarring because when they tape it, the lip can grow together naturally as it was intended without need for stitches, and so there's less scarring. I think also with the dental work, there's been a lot of technology and advancements there. So I think less dental work is needed. But again, this is all depending on the severity of the cleft. I know every baby is born, their cleft is different. Some are unilateral, some are bilateral, some are very wide, some are not too wide. So there's so many variations in the cleft. Socially, I wish I could say that there's been a lot of progress and that cleft lip is accepted. Sadly, I think it's the same as when I was growing up. And this is the issue that I'm the most passionate about. Cleft lip and palate is a very, very old birth difference. It dates back BC. King Tut had a cleft lip, and there's records from the Chinese people when they did their first surgery, like I said, 1800 BC. So for a birth difference that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, society is not very well known, very well informed about it. And the other thing, and I don't know if you know this, but a cleft lip happens to 1 in 700 babies worldwide, which is the same incidence as Down syndrome. Now, everybody knows about Down syndrome. Even children, no matter their age, they know what Down syndrome is. They know either how to recognize it or they know that if they see another person with Down syndrome, there's something different and they respect that person. I don't think they bully them quite as much as they would bully someone with a cleft lip or other facial difference. And again, there's a lot more knowledge. Society has a lot more knowledge for Down syndrome. So I always ask, somewhat rhetorically, why isn't society more knowledgeable about cleft lip when it has the same birth incidence and it's been around much, much longer than Down syndrome? And so I don't think that there's been much advancement in society accepting cleft lip. I think there's been a lot of advancements in speech therapy, though. And that's one of the things that I am working to, and I know that you are too with your podcast, is to help educate society and reduce the bullying around those of us with those facial differences.
Yeah, for sure. That was actually going to be the next thing that I wanted to talk about is speech. What have you done to work, through issues with speech that are caused by your cleft?
So I had speech therapy from when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. Like we were talking about before the podcast got on, I had to go from, I was originally in a Catholic school for first grade, kindergarten. Half of first grade, I went to a Catholic school, and then halfway through first grade, I transferred to a public school because I needed speech therapy, and the the insurance and the state wouldn't cover it if they knew I went to a Catholic school. So by going to the public school, they were able to cover it, and the school schedule went a little bit better. So when I was about maybe 6 years old, 7 years old, until I was 16, I had nonstop speech therapy once, maybe twice a week. And if not for me, as my mother puts it, throwing a teenage temper tantrum at 16, I would probably still be in speech therapy now. at 16, what 16-year-old really wants to go to speech therapy instead of hanging out with her girlfriends or maybe even thinking about, well, I mean, I was thinking about boys, but boys weren't really looking at me. But the last thing I wanted to do was go to speech therapy after school and had to tell, the few friends that I did have. In my case, when I went for speech therapy was at college. I went to a college that had students studying to be speech pathologists. It was also on the same campus where my high school was. So at the high school, I would walk over to the college, and my classmates saw me and they said, well, why are you walking over to college? Are you that smart? You can't be that smart. And I'd have to explain to them, no, I'm going to speech therapy, and all the shame and all the icky feelings came up again. And so one day, halfway through my sophomore year in high school, I says, you know what? Told my parents, I says, I'm done. I'm done with speech therapy. It also brought up too much shame in me. And my mother says, no, you need more. You're not good enough yet. You're not perfect. And that was that language that, I can go on a whole nother hour about the language, but we'll save that for next time. So yeah, so I stopped with speech therapy, and I've been a little bit more conscious of how I talk, especially now that I've gotten into public speaking. I used to talk very, very fast, and sometimes I still do when I get excited. But again, just being aware of that. People have told me that, sometimes I talk fast and they ask me to repeat myself. And so it's been a lot of self-development work as I got older, but I am grateful for the 16 years of speech therapy I had. I think that helped a lot.
Yeah, that's something that I'm gonna have to work on with Giselle. Giselle's my daughter as well, and she's just 18 months, so she's still a little baby. But I took her in to be evaluated, and they said, so far she's doing okay, but they want to reevaluate her again. Actually, this is the time frame now because I took her in when she was 15 months, so they wanted me to bring her in when she was 18 months. So we'll see what her journey looks like with that. But you've talked about your mom and your dad and how involved they were with your cleft journey and just your experience in general with them. And I guess like in thinking about my own daughter as well, what would be advice that you could give to a mother child that has a cleft? Like what advice would you give them in raising, or actually me? What advice would you give me as I raised Estelle?
Mhm. Yeah. Her, I guess, help her build her confidence and let her listen to her, really listen to her, and be her friend and her mother, and let her know that I mean, I know it's gonna be natural. You're gonna want to tell her that she's beautiful and that you accept her the way she is, but sometimes telling her that she's beautiful makes her feel, and again, this is gonna be different. Your daughter, or you're gonna know her better than me. But for me, being told, "Oh, you're beautiful and you're perfect," creates that language of always hearing it, that it didn't match what I saw in the mirror. So talk to her about her cleft. That was the biggest issue I had growing up. My parents never talked to me about my cleft. They never explained to me why I needed all the surgeries. It was always because you need them, because you were born with a cleft lip, but not what it really was. The doctors didn't even, they would talk to me like they would talk about me as if I wasn't in the room. And if I did ask questions, it was always, you're too young, you won't understand, your mother will explain it to you. And my mother never explained it to me. So talk to Giselle about her cleft. Let her know that it's a part of her. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's who she is, part of who she is, but it does not define her. What defines her is what she does, her hobbies, what she likes, how she acts toward other people, what she favors, what she grows up to become, what she will do and give back to the world, and the friends that she makes and the people that she touches. Her cleft is just going to be a part of her, like, her hair color, her eye color, and how tall or how short she's going to be. It's not, it's not her defining personality. It could be if you allow it, but it does not have to be. And so talk about it, because the more you talk about it at home, the more comfortable she will be talking about it with others. And definitely there's nothing to be ashamed of with it. That was the biggest thing to me also. For me, my parents always treated it like it was something to be ashamed of. I couldn't talk about my feelings. So that's the other thing. and I know I'm rambling a little bit now too, but definitely encourage her to talk about her feelings. Either talk about her feelings with you or with a counselor or a therapist, or as she gets older, a friend. But definitely talk about her feelings. And that I would say for any parent, no matter even if your child doesn't have any birth differences, it's always so important these days to help your children talk about their feelings. Don't keep them bottled up, because when they talk about their feelings, they're able to, it goes back to building that confidence. You're able to manage them and to live with them and to cope with them better. And you feel empowered. You just feel like you're able to tackle the world when you know your feelings and your emotions aren't going to get the best of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. What do you think has been the biggest lesson that you've learned in your journey?
For me, the biggest lesson has been that I am worthy. And that's been a very hard lesson for me to learn, but that I have so much to give, and that I am worthy, and that I was born with a cleft for a reason. And, for me, that reason is to go out and be an advocate and to help others who have a cleft and help parents with children with a cleft realize that they're not alone, and that, they're part of a special community. They're part of a great community. And that, yeah, like we talked about earlier, this is, 1 in 700, but it's not, it's a challenging life, but it's also a life that makes us more compassionate and resilient and tough. And so my biggest lesson from all of this has been how strong I am and how resilient I am, but also how compassionate I am, and that I have a lot of self-worth, and that I have a lot to give, and that I'm much more than I ever thought I was.
Yeah. Well, wow. That's really powerful. Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you, Christine, and thank you for sharing your journey here with us today. As I've said to you before we started, I'm grateful for you and for all of us that have been able to share our stories on this platform here. And um, I feel indebted, to be able to listen and to also be a small part of your journey as well. So thank you.
You're very welcome, Laura.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening to the Our Forever Smiles Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. Be sure to subscribe and submit a review of the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I hope that you have enjoyed this audio experience. Maybe you cried a little, laughed a little, but more importantly, I hope that you feel a little piece of reassurance and even joy in your journey. We'll talk to you next week.